RJ, welcome to the Predictable B2B Success Podcast, brought to you by Sproutwith.com. For those listening in, our guest is Richard Kedziora, co-founder of Estenda. RJ, I believe you have well over 25 years of software product design, development, and management experience. And Estenda itself, I believe, focuses on producing software solutions for the healthcare space, especially. Now, your work has also won multiple awards, including most recently the Health 2.0 Outstanding Leadership Award. I'm curious, given the space that you work in, because in my research, I'm finding that there's more of a trust deficit, if you will, in B2B relationships, which has reached a bit of a critical point, according to research, where only 3% of B2B buyers trust sales pitches upon first contact, and more than half prefer to research solutions independently rather than engage with sales reps themselves. This, of course, is more pronounced in the healthcare space, where you've got regulatory compliance and patient outcomes hanging in the balance. At the same time, research also indicates that B2B marketers now believe that human-centric marketing approach provides more of a competitive edge, and the CEOs, 80% of which, recognize that empathy is a key driver of success. And I'd love to get your take on empathy and trust as it relates to relationships and certainly software development as well, in order to drive revenue growth. But Richard, I take it, given your journey to date, that there is a leadership streak in you, and I'm curious, when did you first realize that you were a leader?
Great question, and thanks for having me on the show today. Looking forward to the conversation. It's funny because I was looking at the calendar earlier, and it's actually been 30 years since I graduated college, which is amazing to be able to talk about 3 decades of experience. But that leadership, been the focus, started back then in college. Early on in those days, I went to Duquesne University in Pittsburgh and got a computer science degree, but I was always leading this society, part of that group organization. There's it's called the Association of Computing Machinery, very much computer science focused. I ran the Duquesne chapter way back when, but I've always been in that position of where if I saw something that wasn't being done to my satisfaction, it's okay, how can we make this happen? So even early on in college days, I started getting into that leadership streak of how can I make a difference in the world, is the way I look at it.
Certainly. And with Estenda, what was the problem that you saw that kind of triggered this whole journey into developing Estenda to what it is today? And are the problems that you're trying to solve for today still the same as when you started off, or has it evolved somewhat?
Some of those challenges are still here. Some of them have improved. Started Estenda in 2003, so over 20 years of doing this. And it's interesting, when we started Estenda back then, it was, the internet was a thing, but smartphones didn't exist. Facebook wasn't a thing. Instagram wasn't around just then. So it was a completely different world than we are in today. Healthcare technology, wearable technology has completely transformed what is possible. When we started Estenda, I came from the pharmaceutical world and was just looking for that challenge. I thrive on the challenge of trying to solve a problem. How can we improve on what currently exists? And healthcare has embraced technology from a diagnostic perspective. There's tons of MRIs and X-rays, but it's still slow to adopt data. It's like the last industry that's really has adopted the idea of data and the power of information that you can get from it. So when we started back in 2003, it was very much, how do we acquire this data? How do we get more information about what's going on in that patient experience? How do we bring together electronic medical record systems? Back in the early 2000s, the world was very much paper-based. We were fortunate to work with some government organizations, military, healthcare, the VA here in the United States, that had those medical record systems. And as we worked with community health clinics and other health systems, back then it was like, we want to do a data integration project. And be like, here's my database, good luck. have fun with it. Then it was a deep dive into the inner workings of the EMR, which was always interesting. To fast forward 20 years now, there is so much data that is available. Physicians are overwhelmed with it. Healthcare practitioners in general are overwhelmed with the amount of information that's available. You as an individual person, as a patient, is quickly getting to that point. I saw an infographic just today on all of the different wearable technologies that you could use to better understand what's going on in your body. And it's close to 30 different devices that you could wear in some capacity. I wear one of the Ring devices to track my biometric data and my heart rate, my sleep patterns, kind of thing, what I'm eating. Fascinating. So that journey has changed from, okay, how do we get to the data, to now today, how do we make use of that data? How do we find those patterns and make recommendations to help improve patient care and wellness?
Given your journey to date, what would you say is your personal area of strength?
It's that problem solving area. You started talking about like the idea of sales and empathy, and I love that concept. Totally personally embrace it. And Estenda, as a philosophy, we talk and think about empathy, understanding that user's journey. So that's my background. I came up through the software development ranks and just hardcore programming, sitting at the keyboard hour and hour. But I realized early on, while technology is important, it's much more about that personal journey, the person that's using it, the people involved. And that's where that idea of empathy comes into it. Like, you really need to understand, if you're a person with diabetes or multiple sclerosis, what is that journey like for you? What is it like for the provider that's caring for you? And so that's really enabled my career over the years and what we do at Estenda today. As we onboard new employees now, depending on the project that you're on, we are going to provide you with some medical training. That's either through somebody that's part of the project, if we're working with a doctor or a PhD, or just so much information available on YouTube, out there in the internet. Harvard, Stanford, Mayo Clinic, they all put out incredible amounts of information to learn from. So we'll curate some of that information and help you learn and better understand the patient situation, or how a person with a particular condition is cared for, to be able to make those better decisions in what you're creating.
In this area of strength, this ability to really problem solve, what would you say is something that businesses don't know but should?
It's to come back to that empathy. And I see it time and time again, that's lacking. And it's, you start developing a solution, you start developing it for yourself. What do you find interesting? Is, okay, what programming languages am I going to use? I can develop the solution in Java or .NET or Python kind of thing. And until you get to really high levels of scalability, where most healthcare solutions aren't. You don't have a Netflix healthcare where, performance has to be to the nth degree, or the Amazons kind of thing. You can really use any of those technologies, and it's really about understanding the user's perspective. And if you're sitting there and developing a solution for 6 months, even 3 weeks, and you're not talking to your users, you're not providing feedback and having them be an integral part of that solution, you're just not going to be successful. It's that empathy and understanding the customer perspective.
When customers come to you with a problem, would you say that they have a very clear idea of what they need, especially given the amounts of data that we talked about as being overwhelming, at least to some folks in the healthcare space? Or is it that they have a general idea, but not a very clear definition of what needs to be done?
Yeah, and that's what I love about what I get to do. It's, most of our customers come to us with an idea that's generic. I want to make an impact in diabetes, or I have this new data, or hey, I just exited my first company, my mother has multiple sclerosis, I want to do something to help people, or I had mental health challenges and experienced burnout. Let's develop a solution to help address that in the market. And then through an exploratory process, together we come up with what that solution should be and look like, because it's very much, again, that empathy, understanding their journey, who are we designing and creating for, what exact problem and approach are we trying to solve for that problem. So we're fortunate that some of our customers have put our names on patents. So the customer always owns the intellectual property. They own the software that we're creating. But it just demonstrates that we've been so much part of the solution that was created that they're like, okay, it's worth putting someone from Estenda's name on that actual patent. And then, as you can imagine, in healthcare, it's one thing for all of us to sit around in a room, from doctors to PhDs and patients, to come up with a solution. You have to really test it. And then, so we'll run clinical trials, and we have some PhDs on staff that if you don't have them available, we can help guide you in that process and power a clinical trial, run the study, do the data analysis, write a paper. We just had a paper published in JAMA Ophthalmology around some machine learning work we did. And one of our developers has their name on that paper. I don't think they quite appreciate how awesome that is to have their name on a paper in JAMA Ophthalmology. But they were so much part of that journey that the authors and the PhDs, it makes sense to put this person's name on that paper.
That's very interesting, because you're saying that there are a number of people that need to be party to this process of really empathizing with not just your patients, but with all the medical professionals involved, the regulatory organizations, etc. So from what I find interesting is how you're strategically positioning a solution or client that you're working for with all these stakeholders in order to achieve an outcome that's not just addressing a medical need or a personal need, but also being in business, revenue growth as well. Empathy, I hear, is a key part of that. What else is required to be able to position correctly and effectively?
Healthcare is unique. So you go into most domains and it's follow the money. It's okay, who's paying for it? And that's one of the most important aspects. It's, okay, you're building a car. Okay, who's buying that car? The customer's buying the car. What are their needs? And in healthcare, the person or group that's paying for it is often not the one using it. So you have that challenge. If I work with a company and we develop a digital health app for the treatment of depression, who is going to pay for that application? In some cases, you can target the patient directly themselves. Okay, so individuals don't typically want to pay a lot for a mobile health app. That's slowly changing and shifting, but you're not going to have a patient paying $100 a month for use of a digital health app. In producing one of these apps, and if you do have to go to the FDA, your development costs are going to be significantly higher than if you don't go through the FDA. So then is the doctor going to pay for that? No, the doctor is not incentivized to pay for that. It's probably the insurance company. So now when you think about your sales cycle, in your business process, okay, I need to convince the insurance company that's going to pay for this that it's a good idea. I need to convince the doctors to recommend this to the patient, and then the patients to actually pick this up and use it and engage it. So you have various different dynamics going on there that you don't typically have in other industry, which makes it challenging. And is the reimbursement there? There, I referenced digital health apps, and there's probably 300,000 or so, depending on who counts, digital health apps on the market. And then probably 2016, 2017, this idea of a digital therapeutic came about. And that was where you're taking that digital health app, but elevating it. It's going through the FDA clearance process to say, yes, using this app makes a difference in the life of that patient. Can make a material difference. There's only dozens of those right now because the bar is sufficiently high. But the idea for those is that the physician is going to recommend them, and the insurance company is then going to reimburse at a higher rate. So the companies that are creating these projects can actually get a much better return on their investment in developing the solution. Developing healthcare, any systems, there's definitely an aspect of altruism there. that empathy. I want to create this. I want to help people. It's one of the reasons we love being in healthcare. But you do also have to make money to stay in business, to support the people using your software. So how do you do that? And digital therapeutics was a while, it was, okay, here's now a great opportunity. But the funding mechanisms, the insurance billing codes just weren't there. So that hasn't picked up quite as quickly as people wanted it to in the industry. Now this year, going into next year, there are new CMS billing codes around digital health apps for mental wellness. So that's expected to start changing and shifting. But yeah, it's a long journey in the world.
Okay. The other aspect that comes to mind is the fact that you're based in the US. Obviously, there are higher cost structures given the fact that you're into software development. A lot of people have looked to outsource or offshore these solutions. And I would imagine that it can be a bit of a sticky point for some people looking to invest in software development of their solutions. How are you transforming this perspective of being I would label as a premium offer or a solution into a bit of a competitive advantage, especially when selling into healthcare organizations?
Yeah, there's a couple aspects to that. A number of our customers just love the fact that we are US based, and there's a sense of inherent trust that we're here in the US, that it's very easy for us to get on a plane nowadays and travel if we want. Most of what we do is totally remote these days. With COVID, we went fully remote and have successfully stayed that way. Our employees like that. And so that works from that perspective. But we're in similar time zones. And they like the fact that we're here in the US. Common cultural backgrounds always helps. But when you start thinking about that empathy, it's like, who are we developing for? You do want to bring people of that similar cultural background to the picture. When we do international language translations, and we're always pulling in native speakers to be able to make sure that those translations are done successfully. But yes, cost is a concern for everybody. So we have developed that nearshore capabilities. We have partnered with other companies over the years to help control costs on a bigger project. Some of the things we've done are like multi-year engagements with a thing. It's like, okay, so how do we help control those costs from that perspective? So yeah, we love to say, yes, I'm US only kind of thing, but that's just not realistic in today's world. It's a global economy. How can we take it?
So playing smart there. When it comes to regulatory compliance requirements, a lot of people, when I speak to them, view it as a bit of a no option kind of perspective that they take to this. And I wonder if you have specific processes that you've developed to turn these requirements into revenue opportunities.
Estenda as a corporation is ISO 13485 certified, which in layman's terms, it means we have a well-documented software development process. Right. So when we engage with a company and work on a project, we have SOPs, standard operating procedures, around how that project is run. We have templates and SOPs around how each of the different steps as part of the process works. The first step, as you can imagine, is a project plan. How are we going to run this project? What are the individual steps? We have requirement documentation. It outlines, okay, here are the things we think about. And as you go through the process, it is very iterative. Customer is an intimate part of that. They're a partner in it. Again, we're not going off for 6 months and developing something and coming back and say, hey, here you go. They're lockstep with us the entire way. And it's very, as you have those SOPs, it's very template and checklist driven. As you're in the early stages, I always think of a project when you do these, you want to reduce your risk and create value as quickly as possible. And so you have a checklist from a design perspective. Okay, well, let's look at performance. Let's look at scalability. Let's look at cybersecurity. At the phase we are in the project, are we going to address that today or this month? Cybersecurity, yes, you're going to do very early on in the process. But okay, performance, scalability, for the first 6 months, we're going to be in clinical trials. We're going to have 2 doctors, a couple dozen patients. We're not going to worry about that today. So now we thought about it and made that conscious decision. And that's what those checklists are about. They're very extensive. As you go through the process, there's a couple of high-level examples there. But you want to make sure you're thinking about all of these, particularly when you are going to go to the FDA at that level and need to get something reviewed. I would also say the first thing you should do when you embark on that type of project is start talking to the FDA. They're your friend. So very early on, you want to engage with the FDA, create your plan, and get their feedback on your approach to taking something through the FDA process and taking it to market, such that you're crossing all their and checking their boxes early on in the process.
I love this idea that you're of being process-driven, checklist-oriented. That can certainly go a long way. However, if you're going into a new project where you may have a bit of an idea as to what that journey looks like, there's still the situation where you don't know what you don't know. And I'm curious, how have you invested in your empathy development, both in yourself and perhaps with the wider team, in order to address the issue of the unknown and shine a light on areas that haven't initially come up in discussion or thought?
And I love the fact that you use that term unknown unknowns, because I'm always talking about that, because that's a huge thing in software development. And when you get early on in the project, and with customers as well, it's like early on in that process, when you're in that exploratory phase, you don't know what you don't know at that point. So we very much think of it, I referenced, how do we reduce risk and create value really quickly? And the analogy I use quite often is, you have a challenge. You live on one side of town and your work is on the other side of town and you need to get there. And okay, so you can walk, but that takes a while. I want to create something so I can get to work faster. Okay, I can build a car, but that's going to take a long time. I don't know how to build a car. There's a lot of things I don't know, and I don't even know what to ask just yet. But I know how to build a skateboard. So let's start with the skateboard. Okay, easy to build, less cost, faster, and I'm creating value. So now, very quickly, I'm getting across town faster. I've noticed a problem. It's a little unstable. Let me add like a handle to it so I can stand up, so it's more like a scooter. Okay, now let me add an engine to it, kind of thing. So now it goes a little faster. Now it's raining out and I get wet. Okay, let's build it into a motorcycle. And you gradually build up in those phases. And that's the way we think about addressing this and finding those unknowns. So in the software world, can I start basic user interviews, having those conversations about the individual experience, what information exists, and moving to the old days when you sat around in a room, whiteboard or paper prototypes, back of a napkin kind of thing. Now we're using the online tools, the Balsamics, the Figma. I always start in just black and white, because I'm also afraid of pushing customers and users giving us feedback too far in one direction. I want to try and remain as agnostic as possible about what that solution is in the early stages and not influence too much. So always start very low fidelity, low level of detail, black and white, and build up over time, where you're realizing value and discovering those questions very quickly.
Brilliant. Is there a nuance to the way you ask questions, the nature of questions that you found helps unpack some of these insights?
There's a concept of 5 whys.
Yeah.
So it's like, I was late to work today. Well, why? My alarm didn't go off. Well, why? I didn't set it when I went to bed last night. Why? I had a couple shots of tequila. Okay. And you ask that to really get to the root cause. I love the 5 whys, but I also like really what's next. Okay, what's next? And we see that in a lot of startup organizations and even in bigger companies, Fortune 50s, when we're looking at data, and the conversation will start sort of 2 conversations. One, we want to do an AI project. What are our AI governance processes? And then I'm like, okay, hold on. Let's take a step back and what are your data processes first? But likewise, when they do have data, they want to show a pattern. We're going to find patterns and show that to the provider. And it's very easy to then be like, what next? Okay, what happens after that? And very often in those early conversations, it's like, I don't know. Okay, That's the part we have to figure out. You have to find the pattern. But now this is new data. When you show that data and those patterns to the provider, what are they going to do with it? It's like a physician that goes through medical school today is lucky to have one course on nutrition. They're not trained nutritionists. So if all of a sudden you bring all your food diaries and your nutrition information to the doctor and you only have 7 minutes with them anyway, what are they going to do with that data? It's like, how do you provide information beyond those patterns? So yeah, I love the 5 whys, and I'm always like, what's next? Okay, what, that idea to really get people to start thinking.
In developing your team members, I'm curious, how do you incorporate empathy into their development and ensure that they're on track in terms of where you'd like to see them be at, with having empathy very much a part of their makeup?
I think there's 2 aspects to it that we try, that we embrace in the process. One I referenced is that we provide some of that background, that education. What is it to be a person with mental health, to depression? And it's just, as I mentioned, tons of videos and information about that. What does it mean for a provider, a nurse, an educator to work with that? Tons of just those videos of showing that encounter to help build that empathy and understanding of what's going on. The second aspect of it is an aspect of altruism, of helping others. We promote that within the organization, within our processes, our feedback processes, our review processes. It's like, we ask those questions. How have you helped the next person? What have you done to provide knowledge transfer within the team? But even at the software development level, when you're writing code, how are you helping yourself 6 months from now when you have to go back and look at this code? Or more immediately, the quality assurance person that you're working with. How can you make this code more testable to speed that cycle up of development? And then once it's in production, and when something goes wrong, how can we shorten the cycle of understanding what went wrong to then fix it as quickly as possible? Unfortunately, no software is perfect. I'd love to say all of our software is perfect, but that's a reality that things do happen. So how do we understand and discover what happened as quickly as possible to make that correction, to fix it? And so those 2 aspects of that training and the focus on helping others, including yourself, really makes a difference.
I'm curious, are there metrics that you use to measure the success of your empathy-driven approach beyond what you just mentioned?
No, and I struggle with that answer, because I love the idea of metrics. And if you can measure something, then you can start making changes around that. I also find metrics are very challenging, particularly in software development, because once you know what the metric is, you can start gaming the system. And we have a lot of really smart people working for us. And you think of software development, it's like, okay, how many lines of code are you writing? It's easy to write more lines of code. Doesn't mean it's any good. Okay, how many bugs and issues can you find? Then you start putting bugs and issues. And there's a gray line there of, no, do people really do that? No, they don't. But it is easy to game the system, so you have to protect yourself against that. Recently, I was talking to someone about this, and they were like, churn of your code, measure how often your code changes. And I like that, so we're looking at that. But yeah, it's how do you build those metrics into the process? And our cycle, our review cycle now, we try and really push the idea of one-on-ones and that feedback in the moment kind of thing. And we're moving towards that, of more, I think, of a comprehensive day in, day out, week in, week out process of feedback and performance. But it's very much from that performance and employee experience perspective. It's not on me as a manager or owner of the company to be always providing that feedback. I want you as an individual reflecting on that. And we've built that into our process as well, that self-reflection. Like, how are you as an individual doing today? What are your challenges? Because the more aware you are of those things, then you can make those changes and improve over time. It's not just me saying, hey, you need to look at this. It's like, you can realize it sooner, the better off the team is.
You mentioned, I think it was ISO 13485 being certified. I would imagine that it helps a great deal with your sales conversations and close rates. But beyond that, I was wondering if you've developed specific processes to help bridge that trust deficit that we talked about at the start of our chat that has helped you consistently lead to larger contract values.
Mm-hmm. It is, and you started about talking about trust. So much of what we do is about that trust because we're selling custom solutions. You're not coming to us and say, build us an accounting system. There's 20 accounting systems out there on market, or build us a new MRI. Like there are MRIs. You're not talking to us to build you a new MRI or even a new electronic medical record system. There's so many of them on their market. It's just a much better approach to do that. But we can help you build something that's unique to you, that adds value to the picture and kind of thing. So it's based, I don't know that there's any magic one thing that I can be like, aha. It's very much based on a conversation, sharing of ideas, finding that common ground and the trust in working together. A lot of our customers and clients over the years and today come through word of mouth and referrals for that very reason. And as we're working with a particular doctor or a PhD at one institution, and they move on to the next place in their career path, and they'll call us back up and say, hey, let's keep working together. And we've been around for 22 years now. We have a couple of customers that we've been working with for all 22 years and have gone through multiple iterations of leadership that they keep continuing. Others, 10, 15 year long customers that we've been working with is a testament to our abilities, I'd like to think.
Would I be right in saying that you're not just software developers, we're not just a software development team or organization, but rather have really earned a reputation for being able to conduct experiments in a structured way that leads to innovation?
Yes, I think of it as first problem solvers.
Okay. Yeah.
And then it very much embracing that scientific method that's required in software development in the medical world. Like we have those PhDs on staff that can help drive those. Probably the first 10, 12 years of our life as an organization was very grant-based software development, where we would start working with customers and we would say, hey, let's go get a grant together, where you're doing just that. It's like you're creating a hypothesis and here's how we're going to test it, and executing through that. In the last 10 years, we still definitely do grant-based software development. I'm working on some small business innovative research grants, SBIRs, with a couple different customers now to drive that initiative. But then we're also helping commercial suppliers, still very much in that world of, okay, we want to develop something. And even if it's used in-house, so we talk a lot about these patient-facing kinds of solutions, clinical algorithms we're helping develop. It's also understanding the data that's coming off of your device from a real-world usability perspective. As you're developing these systems and putting them out there on the market, you're running these small controlled clinical trials, you get good information, great feedback to improve the product. But then when it goes out into the world and thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people might be using your product, what is the real world experience like? So we're helping customers with that as well. But it's that very controlled, okay, let's try this. Let's experiment. Let's learn, understand, and discover what is possible with the data.
As you get into these conversations, I'd imagine that you probably certainly leverage your experiences to date and your reputation to date to drive business growth. But I'd imagine that you also get people who come in with an idea and perhaps not much structure to the feasibility of these ideas, wherein there's a bit of education required and perhaps a structured process, even in building out a hypothesis that could be defined or contained and measured, so to speak, which in my mind leads to perhaps a lengthy sales cycle. And I wonder if you've got to the stage where you're able to compress that down from when you first started out to help people get launched, so to speak, in terms of covering some of the more basic elements required to put their ideas into traction.
Yeah, I'd love to say I solved that problem. But the sales cycle in the healthcare med tech world is definitely long because of just that. There are so many requirements and things. We do when we talk to organizations, and particularly as we're working with a startup organization that might not be as familiar with software or healthcare or the FDA, there is definitely a lot of education early on in that process. And it's always my analogy of moving from the skateboard to the scooter. And I talk about that a lot. That's okay. How do we develop something that's meaningful to get it out there? You can start generating some feedback, start generating some clinical trial results. I was just talking to somebody today, actually. They were in Pakistan and reached out, and we had a great conversation about how they can do just that in the chronic disease management space. And how do they start realizing that early value? And, so it was, okay, here's one approach that we can start to just generate that value early on. Because if you're developing an application and you want a doctor to recommend it, you really need that clinical trial data. They want to see the evidence that this works. Well, that takes time to get. So how do you develop an application to start sharing it with patients, to start getting that anecdotal data early on? How then do you do what I think is a pre-post design study? It's okay, you can convince one doctor to start working on a study. Okay, we know what the patient situation is beforehand. We run our innovations, see what it's afterwards to get some early feedback. Ultimately, you want to get to those randomized clinical trials, very controlled as your gold standard, but it takes time to work up to that. So yeah, it's how do we short circuit, to your point, how do we short circuit these lengthy cycles to be able to get positive momentum and realize value as quickly?
Okay. You're working with clients and turning initial projects into long-term partnerships. So I'm curious, how do you maintain consistent service delivery, especially with a remote workforce?
As part of that ISO process, there's extensive training that happens. And that process, the ISO process, helps drive that. Here's how we're delivering projects. And that goes through improvements as well. So as we're going on, that's not a static process in and of itself. It's how do we improve it as we go on? That's an inherent part of the process, that it's continually improved. We go through, we do internal audits. We get externally audited by third parties. A couple of our customers audit us as well to make sure that we are compliant with those processes and find those opportunities for improvement within it. Really helps us maintain our high standards. Constantly sharing information within the groups and across groups and organizations. How do we improve that? Today, it's okay, how do I use generative AI to shorten those cycles? It's just a huge topic of conversation. It's very much an 80% solution. Nobody's going to, okay, here, the Gen AI said X. Okay, great. But it gets you to be brainstorming and start thinking about stuff that you might not have thought about.
And again, curious if you incentivize employee contributions that lead to client success.
We have not historically have had to do that. We have done time to time bonuses and things like that. Our typical employee comes to us because we work in the healthcare medtech space, and they're like, they enjoy that aspect of it. Myself personally, I have said it a number of times, but I've developed the accounting systems and Salesforce systems and a railroad car scheduling system back in the 90s kind of thing, and they were fun. But okay, I've now developed systems that help people with diabetes, with multiple sclerosis, with mental health. I can go to bed a little nicer at the end of the day knowing that's what I'm doing day to day.
Sure.
So definitely the people that come to us and then work for us have that mindset.
So my takeaway would be you're very much a values-driven, mission-focused type organization. Would that be fair?
Yeah.
Are there perhaps a couple of areas within this idea of bridging trust deficit or building out empathy in your relationships, be it with clients or even within your team, that you find doesn't get much airtime? If so, what would those be?
Honestly, I don't have a good answer for you right now.
That's all right.
I call me tomorrow and I'll probably tell something. When I sleep on it, I'll be like, aha! But yeah, I don't know what that is.
No worries. I'm also curious, personal attention and empathy and being able to scale that as your company grows. How are you approaching that?
It is because of the nature of what we do that is a challenging problem. And it's bringing in the right people. So we're a relatively flat organization. How do we bring in those right people that have the same mindset? It's one thing to train and educate, but it's another if we can bring people in that have that mindset day to day. So yeah, through our interviewing process and talking to individuals, we try and really identify people with the similar values, the desire to develop these systems and help people and have the empathy is hugely powerful in doing that. Again, I point back to the process. That process helps. Okay, here's how we do this. It's a structure, it's a framework to be able to deliver projects. But ultimately, it is about people. We're not selling a product. Okay, I'm selling a product now. I have 50 licenses, now I have 60 licenses, now I have 70 licenses. It's very much people driven, hours driven, project driven kind of thing. I've talked to a lot of different companies and we look for partnership opportunities and things like that. And we don't do a lot of fixed price projects because of what we were talking about, of just that unknown. If you really know what you want to create and you have it nailed down to the nth degree, there are cheaper ways to create that project. But if you're trying to figure that out and not sure and it's very just exploration, then that's who we love working with because we just love being part of that process.
Brilliant. As you look ahead into the future, given our increasing ability to access data and perhaps use it to solve for particular situations or circumstances, how would you anticipate medtech changing and influencing the healthcare space as we know it?
And there's a couple things to that. We have a sick-based system here. You get sick, you go to the doctor. But so much of your health and wellness is controlled by what you do outside of that office environment. So the idea of the wearables, the data, the feedback that we're starting to get and can get, I think is starting to change that picture. There's still, yes, access to the technology and equity issues that have to be addressed, but the technology is getting cheaper and cheaper to produce, which makes it more accessible to larger populations of people, which is awesome. And I think there's this idea of aging at home. So as the population is getting older and older, my parents are entering their 80s and they're doing pretty good. They're fortunate from that perspective. They live at home kind of thing. When their health does decline, they want to stay at home. They don't want to move into a care facility or anything like that. They love being in their house that they decorated, they're familiar, they're comfortable with, they know where everything is. So how can we use technology to enable them to stay at home longer? So I think that's going to be a huge impact in healthcare as we move forward. That combined with the power of AI, particularly Gen AI, to interact with people, with individuals, there are concerns. We do have to worry about hallucinations of Gen AI making up stuff. Yes, but it's also an incredibly powerful technology to help interpret that data and explain it to an individual. So I don't know a lot about quantum mechanics, but I can go ask, hey, explain quantum mechanics to me. And if I don't get what it said, it's okay, explain that to me like I'm a fifth grader. And it will right away transform and even come up with analogies to be able to explain that such that I can understand it. And if I still don't understand, I can be like, okay, tell me like I'm a kindergarten kid. And it will make that translation very quickly for you as an individual. As more and more people get access to this technology, it's like, how do we meet them where they are at their health literacy level, their just reading ability kind of thing, the ability to comprehend the vast amounts of information out there? The Gen AI technology can help approach that problem.
Certainly. Thought leadership. I'm curious, what role does it play overall in terms of revenue growth for Estenda?
Yeah, conversations like this. We get people that call up like, hey, I heard you on so-and-so podcast, or I saw you at so-and-so conference. People come up afterwards and talk to you. So yeah, it's when we talk about that trust and this is that initial foray. It's, oh, that was interesting what you were saying. I was just wrestling with that problem myself. Let's talk about it. I do have a lot of just conversations with people, whether it's a conversations or Zoom these days kind of thing. And I was referencing the person in Pakistan that I was talking to. We connected on some platform back in August, and then he reached out today. He's like, hey, I remember we were, and so I had a great conversation today. I had another person that was like, a year after we had a conversation, like, I saved your business card because you were talking about the X, Y, and Z. And I knew I was going to need you at some point in time. And that's just fun because it's like, okay, and then I got to rack my brain. It's like, where did we meet? It makes it interesting, but it just leads to those conversations.
We've got a fair bit of ground around your empathy-driven approach and addressing the trust deficit. Looking to wrap up, so if you were listening to this episode, RJ, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
It'll come as no surprise to anybody, but empathy is first and foremost not thought of a lot in the software development cycle, the world kind of thing. You need to pay attention to it, need to focus on it. Understanding your user and their journey is what's going to make your software successful. I wish I didn't have to say that. And no mistake, there are a lot of really good people out there making a lot of really good software and impacts in the world and everything like that. But then equally likewise, there's a bunch of people that just don't get it. And they're sitting there behind their computer developing for themselves. And that's not how you're going to be successful. So I embrace the idea of empathy in your user.
If listeners are curious, want to find out more or connect with you, where would you recommend they head to?
.com, ESTENDA.com, our website, or I'm always on LinkedIn. You can find me there, Richard Kedziora, Kedzira. You probably put it in the show notes. I'm at a HitLab conference later in the year kind of thing, and I'm usually at Health and Vibe and HIMSS and those conferences, wandering around, engaging in those conversations and seeing what people are up to.
We'll certainly include the website and LinkedIn links in the show notes. RJ, this has been terrific. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. Had a great conversation.